Hello and welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm Junaid Tibshirani and today I'm joined by the two candidates running in the Mount Albert by-election. We're joined by the Labour MP Jacinda Ardern and the Green Party's Julie Anne Genter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Nice to be here.
Julie Anne, just to begin with you, what is going on behind the scenes between the Green Party and Labour, given we have two, both of you from different parties, but in just less than 2 weeks' time, both the Greens and Labour are doing the combined State of the Nation speech in Mount Albert.
Oh, we announced last year that the Greens and Labour were working together. We have a memorandum of understanding to change the government. So it's very clear that we've got enough policy and alignment to be working together towards a future coalition government after the next election. But we're still separate political parties and we have slightly different things on offer, and it's important for people in Mount Albert, I think, to have the choice about who they're going to vote for.
Sure. Okay. And Jacinda, how are you going to work around combat the perception that people might have that this by-election is going to highlight the differences too much between the two parties? I think the commentator Simon Wilson has said that perhaps National isn't running in this area because it strategically wants to highlight the differences between the two. What do you make of that?
Oh, I think that might be a little bit generous on Simon's part. I suspect that they made a call that either they take the hit at the beginning for choosing not to run or take it on election night. But I take the view that by-elections are an opportunity for all political parties to really demonstrate what their platform is, what their vision is for not just the area but for New Zealand. And political parties should take up that opportunity. So there's nothing strange about the Greens and Labour choosing to do that. There's something quite odd though about National choosing to not do that. So I'm not concerned about the focus being on the differences. I think we'll model what a vision for a future Labour-Green government would look like. Sure.
Okay. And look, I mean, your predecessors in Mount Albert have been leaders of the Labour Party. We've had Helen Clark and also David Shearer. So, and people have touted you as to be a future leader of the party as well. What do you think your biggest achievement to date is?
I'm going to be very sad to break the tradition of Labour leaders in the Mount Albert seat, but what is absolutely true is they've always had individuals who have had strong positions within their opposition parties or government. And so as a front bench member, I can absolutely bring to the table that voice for this seat at a senior level. I'd say to date, in opposition, it's always hard to progress your ideas because obviously you're not holding the Treasury benches. But some of the things that I've been most proud of, apart from my local constituency and casework, which I get a greater amount of satisfaction from, has been the work I've been able to do on the children's portfolio and on the portfolio on youth employment when I had it. Our dole to apprenticeship scheme, which would subsidise employers to take on apprentices, was a scheme I worked really hard on and is Labour policy today. And also things like our Best Start package about lifting families and children out of poverty, and the wider program we have to improve child wellbeing is a piece of work I worked on for a very long time and I'm very, very proud of. Sure. But they're things I want to implement. At the moment, they're all on paper, and you really get your proud moments, I think, when you're in government.
Sure. Okay, and Julie Anne, what about you? What do you think is your achievement that you're most proud of to date?
I have to go with some of the progress in Auckland Transport since I've been involved in politics, working both as a professional in transport but as a Green Party volunteer and then as a Green Party MP. We've successfully campaigned for the electrification of Auckland's rail network. That's when I joined the Greens back in 2007. And since then, we've had, finally, the government agreeing to the City Rail Link, which is the next essential step in the development of our rail network. We've had the national government increase the amount of money for urban cycleways tenfold, and I think in large part that was due to successful campaigning by the Green Party on our Safe to School policy, and just showing how illogical National's approach to transport spending has been. I think we're really starting to win the debate. But even though we've pushed them thus far, we'll be able to achieve so much more in government.
Sure, okay. And look, transport, as you've said, that has been a large focus for you, and that'll tie in really well, and it's really relevant in Auckland. What would be some of the main things that you'd be pushing for if you were to win this seat in that arena?
Well, in Auckland, we need to be committed to the next steps of rail development, and we need central government funding for that. So that's light rail, rapid transit connection to the airport, which is desperately overdue. We're looking at a light rail connection that will actually go right along the Mount Albert electorate, along Dominion Road, and eventually out to the airport. We also need further extension of the rapid transit network to the North Shore. That should be the next harbour crossing, should be rail. There's so much more we could be doing in terms of making people the centre of our transport planning on the streets and in our neighbourhoods. We have been campaigning on safe walking and cycling to schools, and I think it's really relevant in Auckland because school traffic is a major generator of congestion, but also kids not being able to walk and cycle to school isn't good for them. And so our Safe to School plan involves dropping speed limits right in front of the school gate and having funding available to local councils and schools to actually put in place separated cycleways, walkways, and do those intersection upgrades that are going to make it safe so parents have confidence that they can let their kids get to school on their own steam.
Okay, sure, that's a good point. So in terms of the funding for that is largely the issue, particularly with rail. What are both of your thoughts on public-private partnerships and the role that the private sector will have in this?
I think what's really been lacking to date, though, has been council-central government partnership when it's come to major pieces of infrastructure. The City Rail Link was a great example. Auckland Council, the vision of the Mayor was to deliver that massive piece of infrastructure, but central government National just really dragged the chain on that. They weren't willing to listen to the business case. You know, Labor came out, it was in the 2011 election, and absolutely firmly committed to funding that, and as did the Greens. And for us, it's about what are those other infrastructure projects that are critical to Auckland's productivity to get off the ground. So in the Mount Roskill by-election, we talked about funding the light rail link from the CBD down Dominion Road, and that's really critical. Sitting down with council and saying we need a 30-year plan for Auckland transport that would include, for instance, relevant to Mount Albert, cross-town connections so that you don't have to go into the city to meet the northwestern or the southern public transport routes. Those are things we need to plan together and fund together. Sure.
Yeah. No, you are right that this what we saw in the mayoralty race and with the government as well, this constant sort of bickering between the two, you know, one saying that it's central government's responsibility, it's council's responsibility. It was unproductive, wasn't it?
There's two obvious things that government could do straight away, but it does require central government. And the first is to enable the transport budget to be spent on any infrastructure project based on how effective it's going to be at moving people and goods. And, you know, they've got a 10-year plan for spending. The vast majority of new capex for infrastructure is allocated to new state highway infrastructure, no matter how poor the business case. It cannot be considered for rail projects, even though they might actually deliver more mobility benefits, more decongestion benefits, more benefits in terms of freight. So you've got to have that joined up approach to the transport network and funding, and only central government can do that. The second thing is central government can enable local government better sources of revenue to invest in their share of transport infrastructure. It doesn't make sense to be investing in long-term transport infrastructure like rail from property taxes, from rates. They need a source of funding like a regional fuel tax, or there's other things you can look at that target the uplift in land value that is created when you invest in that infrastructure. But again, it needs central government. So really national is stopping Auckland from raising its own revenue to invest in the transport projects it really needs, while it's putting nearly $2 billion into a new highway project, the East-West Link, which isn't going to solve any particular problems for how people get around.
Right, so road user taxes, you think that's a good idea?
Congestion charges? Okay. Eventually. It's not the first cab off the rank. I mean, there's lots of other things we can be doing before we get to congestion charging.
We should have got rid of the regional fuel tax.
Yeah, the regional fuel tax,
which made sense.
Labor and the Greens actually worked together to get in the 2007 budget to help raise the revenue to pay for electrification. So I think a joined up approach to transport funding means there won't be a funding shortfall. But we also need to prioritize the projects that are greatest value, and the current government isn't doing that. So there's lots of money within the existing transport budget that could be used on better projects.
Right, so it's about allocation.
Yeah.
Okay, look, I want to talk now about housing. The latest REANZ figures say that the median house price in Auckland City is $978,000. Julie Anne, to begin with you, where do you want that to be?
I think we need to look at house price to income ratio.
No,
I mean, it's all about the
figure?
relationship between house prices and income. So it's not just one thing. The problem with this figure is that it's almost 10 times the average income in Auckland, and that makes it extremely difficult for average families to afford a house if they haven't already gotten on the property ladder.
So does it need to be lower than that?
So I think Auckland Council's chief economist put out a paper showing how we could get it back to house prices being 5 times the average income or median income. But I mean, so there's two sides to that coin. One is what are house prices and what are incomes. So obviously, if you raise incomes, you're going to improve that ratio. You're going to improve affordability, and of course, there is the opportunity to provide more supply and ensure that you don't have too many investors in the market, which I think has really bid up prices faster than what they would have done here in Auckland.
Sure. Okay, I'll move on. Jacinda, what about you? We've got 978,000.
Yeah.
Where should it be?
And in Mount Albert, it's over $1 million. Now, look, clearly it's unaffordable. When you take it as a relative measure, it's unaffordable. Just on paper, it's unaffordable. The issue is what's coming on stream that's affordable. And the landscape of new housing that's coming into the Auckland market, it's not 90 square metres, 100 square metres. They're large houses, they're unaffordable houses, often on larger parcels of land that make them unaffordable as well. Only 5% of our new housing is considered affordable housing. So the mix of build is part of the problem as well. Now look, the unitary plan's going to do a bit around that, but actually part of our problem is we are just not building to scale. So that's why we have just accepted that the market have failed. If we want houses in the $500,000 to $600,000 range in Auckland, then we need someone who is able to build at scale, townhouses, apartments, houses on small parcels of land. So that's what we've committed to coming into the market and working alongside the private sector to provide. So, but it's not, it's both council planning, it's building, it's also what we do around tax. It's about the ability of people who are offshore, who do not reside in New Zealand, being able to purchase residential housing. It's about speculators, and we know that there's a large number of people with 7 houses or more who are dominant in the market. It's about cracking down on that as well. So it's about a suite of bold ideas, and all of them we've committed to, that will start making the difference in terms of both supply and the demand that's out there at the moment.
Okay. And it's important that it's more affordable to rent and more secure for renters, especially in Mount Albert, because actually I believe the majority of people in Mount Albert are renters, not homeowners, and having security of tenure and warrant of fitness for rental properties, ensuring that there are affordable rents is just as important for the community.
Since 2008, we're looking at an increase, I think, of roughly 40% that people are paying in the rental market. So, not only can they can't afford to buy, they can't afford to save as well, because a huge proportion of their income is spent on renting. You're right. And often renting poor quality housing. So it needs to be dealt with.
Look, with the house price issue, one would argue that'd be great, and the Green Party did this last year. Maturia today came out and said that yes, prices need to be cut, they need to fall. Would Labor be able to stand up and say that?
Well, what we came out and at the time said the mechanism Maturia was talking about wasn't something that we supported. So look, as we've said, there's going to be differences in the way that we see some of those challenges, but some of our ideas on addressing it, some of them are
So
compatible.
why wouldn't Labor say that actually they just need to fall, they're too high?
Well, our view was that the way that we're going to fall is by making sure that those that are in the price bracket are available. The $1 million house price at the moment that we're looking at, often, as I've said, is around the type of housing that's coming into the market. And so there is a scenario where the value of people's current houses, absolutely will over time plateau. We're all seeing that now. But what we need to then do is bring on stream affordable houses because of the nature of the housing, the parcels of the land. Those are things that are part of making sure that they are in a price bracket that people are able to afford.
Okay. And Jacinda, look, Labor has committed to building 50,000 affordable houses in Auckland. Yes. Over 10 years.
Yes.
How many do you think should be in that Mount Albert electorate? Or what scope is there for them to be built in that area? Oh, look,
there are areas where we've said that we've been open to seeing a bit more growth around Auckland, but it's all about transport nodes. For us, wherever there is a new development, the planning has to be in place to make sure that we have decent public transport that accesses those new housing developments. So that's key for us. So some of it will be brownfield, some of it will be greenfield. In Mount Albert, there are opportunities at the moment. moment, of course, there's over 5,000 dwellings that are looking to be planned at Unitec. For me, the question is, how do we make sure that we deal with the flow-on effects of that new intensification? How do we make sure that we keep school rolls healthy, class sizes down, that we make sure that we address potential congestion, that public transport is solid, frequent and rapid from that area. Sure. And these are issues that actually we need to deal with through all of Mount Albert. With the Waterview connection coming into the area, we're going to see, I think, more and more people trying to access that transport route, possibly more rat runs going through the suburbs. Unless we bring in decent public transport infrastructure, we will not be able to keep our local roads local. So all of that planning isn't just about housing, it's about that transport infrastructure as well.
Okay, and we are, with the unitary plan, the way it's changing, there's room for a lot more densification in that Mount Albert electorate too, so that's going to bring in more people.
And look, in areas like Point Chevalier, they've seen that happen already. A large amount of cross-lease sections have happened over time with planning allowed, and sometimes there was poor planning around infrastructure when that happened. That is what we fundamentally have to change. You can have moderate intensification if it's well planned, if it's decent design, and that you just think ahead about some of these issues. But look, we've already got examples of it now.
And I think that that's why there's a really strong role for government to be involved in master planning neighbourhoods and trying to coordinate what's happening, because if every individual landowner is redeveloping separately, it's not going to create the best outcome in terms of the neighbourhood. But growing the population within Auckland Isthmus is a huge opportunity to actually make the city more livable, more affordable, more interesting. We certainly, when Kiwis go overseas to places like Melbourne or Brisbane or Sydney, there's really cool inner suburbs, and they have much higher population, but it's done well. And that's what we want, is density done well. It was important to get the rules right in the unitary plan. I don't know that they're entirely there, but they're going in the right direction.
How are they not entirely there?
Well, there's still a lot of rules that prevent the kind of high quality apartments that we used to get. Like the apartment building I live in is an Art Deco building from the 1930s. It's only 2 stories. It's beautiful. Everyone who goes there is like, wow, these are fantastic. I didn't know we had apartments like this. There's 16 dwellings in 2 different buildings. They're high stud, and they've got double exposition, which is really great. And it's fantastic. It's very livable, but there's still, in most of the zones in the unitary plan, a number of rules, maybe half a dozen, that would prevent that building from being built.
Okay.
And so that might be, depending on the zone, parking requirements, the height limit. It might just go over the height limit, so it should be more about how many stories you can have, not what the height limit is. The percentage of site coverage, it slightly violates. So there's a whole lot of rules, and it's the site to boundary ratio, like in the building. Sure. And it's just really unfortunate because those rules unintentionally create really ugly design. And they didn't, but a lot of the changes in the unitary plan are still being appealed, so I'm not sure we're seeing the final version of it.
Okay, well that's one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, there's that question of how does central government have a say about building and designing those livable cities when so much of this is devolved? And we've said, because this is such an important job to be done, and because we need to try and instigate development around transport nodes in particular, we want to establish an urban design authority that would have that role of saying, if we've got a development that's of significance, what's our infrastructure? Where's our schools? Where will our schools be? Where will our transport stops be? Where will our green spaces be? At the moment, you look at some of the developments we've had in Auckland, there's been a build it and they will come mentality. Build it with multiple car parks, with no public transport, sometimes without even proper roading, water or sewage links. And then we've expected the ratepayer to pick that up.
And with the SHA...
Sorry, I'm going to have to just... we are running out of time. I just have a final question. Capital gains tax, something the Green Party has stood for. Andrew Little has moved away from that. What are your personal views on capital gains tax, Jacinda?
Well, we've said we want to extend the what's currently called the Brightline test. So basically, if you're purchasing a second or multiple homes and sell them within a 5-year period, that's our policy, then we expect there to be taxation on that, because that's a suggestion there that there's speculative behaviour going on. But we've also said after the election, we want to bring together a tax working group to make sure that our entire taxation system in New Zealand is operating fairly. And so I expect that those issues will then be looked at after the election.
Sure. Okay. And Julianne, just one more question. If you don't win this seat, what's the plan? Will you stand somewhere else, or stand in Mount Albert again?
I'm hoping to be selected to be the general election candidate for Mount Albert this coming week. I believe I'm the only nominee, so I'll probably be selected. So yeah, I was intending to stand in Mount Albert before the by-election came up, before I knew that David Shearer was leaving. So that's why I've ended up as the candidate for the by-election.
Excellent. Okay. Well,
Great.
Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thanks for your time.
It's been really interesting to just get a bit of a perspective on where you stand, what are some of your similarities and differences. So appreciate that. And I guess the message now is to tell everyone to get out and vote in the election. And I'm Janae Tibshirani from interest.co.nz.